I died on my wedding day. Not from a crash, not from an accident, from a broken heart so complete, so surgical, that my body simply gave up. I watched from the hospital bed as my fiancé helped her into the bridal car. My bridal car, smoothing the veil over her face the way he used to brush the hair from mine. And I want you to understand something. That veil was mine. That dress was mine. That man was supposed to be mine. But what I didn't know then, what I only understood the moment my eyes closed for the last time, was that none of it was ever really mine to begin with. They had planned this. All of them. My fiancé, my best friend, and the woman I had trusted most in this world, my own mother-in-law, who smiled at my funeral and went home to finish the wedding cake. I should have stayed dead, but I didn't. I woke up gasping 3 years earlier in the body of a girl who still believed in love, a girl who had no idea what was coming. And this time, I wasn't going to cry, I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to warn a single one of them. I was going to let it happen, every single step. Because the most terrifying revenge isn't stopping someone's perfect day. It's watching them build it, brick by brick, and knowing exactly when it will all come down. If you want to see how I let them walk straight into their own destruction, subscribe and stay with me. Because this story, it doesn't end the way any of them expected. The first thing I felt when I woke up was the smell of gardenias. My mother used to keep them on the kitchen windowsill. I hadn't smelled them in years, not since she passed, not since I moved into the cold, marble-floored world of the Kong family and learned that flowers in their house were only for decoration, never for comfort. But there they were, gardenias, sunlight, the soft creak of my childhood bed beneath me. I sat up so fast I knocked over the glass of water on my nightstand, and I just sat there, shaking, soaked, completely unable to breathe, because I knew this room. I knew the water stain on the ceiling shaped like a crescent moon. I knew the crooked curtain rod my father never fixed. I knew this place the way you only know somewhere you've grieved leaving. I was 23 again. It took me 4 days to fully believe it. 4 days of pinching myself, of checking dates on newspapers, of standing in front of the mirror watching a face I hadn't seen in years stare back at me. Younger, softer, still untouched by everything that was coming. 3 years I had been sent back exactly 3 years before the wedding. Before the bridal car, before the hospital bed, before the moment I watched my fiancé press his lips to her forehead and pretend I had never existed. His name was Daniel Kang. And in 3 years, I had loved him in a way that embarrassed me now, completely, blindly, with the kind of faith that makes a person ignore every red flag, because the light coming off one smile is just too warm to walk away from. But I was done being warm. Here is what I knew, knowledge that had cost me my life to earn. Daniel Kang had never loved me. Not once, not even in the beginning. I was a transaction. The daughter of a man whose land his family needed, whose quiet reputation could stabilize a business deal that had been rotting at its core for years. His mother, Eleanor Kang, had chosen me the way you choose a tool. Useful, temporary, replaceable, and the woman they had always wanted for Daniel? Her name was Sophia Wren, my best friend since college, the woman who held my hand at my mother's funeral and told me I would never be alone. She had been seeing Daniel for 2 years before I even knew they knew each other's last names. 2 years, I know what you're thinking. How did you not see it? How does a woman miss something that enormous? And I'll tell you exactly how. Because Sophia was careful, because Daniel was practiced, and because I was the kind of person who looked for the best in people so aggressively that I made myself blind. Not anymore. On the 5th day of my second life, Daniel called me. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Low, smooth, the kind of voice that made you feel chosen just for being on the receiving end of it. "Mia," he said, "I want to take you to dinner tonight. There's something I want to ask you." I knew what the question was. I had said yes to it once before. In a restaurant with low lighting and a ring I later found out his mother had picked because it was the cheapest in the display case that still looked expensive. I pressed the phone against my ear. I steadied my voice and I said, "Of course, Daniel. I'd love that, because here is the thing about revenge that no one tells you. It doesn't begin with a confrontation. It doesn't begin with screaming or exposing or walking away. it begins with a smile. It begins with letting them believe they still have you. And then, very slowly, you start pulling threads. What Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already found the first thread, and it had Sophia's name written all over it. I went to that dinner looking exactly the way Daniel expected me to look. Soft, grateful, a little nervous. The kind of woman who still couldn't believe a man like him had chosen her. I wore the blue dress he once told me was his favorite. Kept my voice light, laughed at the right moments, and let him reach across the table and take my hand like he owned it. He slid the ring across the table at exactly 8:14 p.m. I remembered the time because the last time, I had been so overwhelmed I forgot to look at the clock. This time, I noted everything. The way his eyes moved to his phone for half a second before he smiled, the way the ring box had a small scratch on the corner. Because Eleanor had opened it first. Inspected it, approved it. The way he said, "I love you," like a man reading from a script he had memorized but never felt. I looked at the ring for a long moment. Then I looked up at him and said, "Yes." But something shifted in me when I said it. Not weakness, calculation. Because I had realized something in those 5 days of being back. If I refused him now, they would simply move on, cover their tracks, and I would never get close enough to pull this apart from the inside. I needed to be in the game to destroy it. So I let him put the ring on my finger, and I started paying attention in ways I never had before. The first thing I noticed was the timing of Sophia's texts. In my first life, I had thought nothing of it. She texted often, she was my best friend, of course she was in contact. But now I watched the pattern. Every time Daniel stepped away to take a call, a text from Sophia would arrive on my phone within minutes. Cheerful, casual, asking where I was, what I was doing, how the evening was going. She was tracking me. For him, the second thing I noticed was Eleanor Kang. In my first life, I had spent 3 years trying to earn that woman's approval. 3 years of cooking her favorite meals, attending her charity events, swallowing her quiet insults with a smile. I had believed, truly believed, that she simply needed time to warm up to me. But 4 days after the engagement, Eleanor invited me to lunch alone. Last time, I had walked into that lunch trembling with hope. This time, I walked in with a recording app running silently in my purse. She was gracious, she poured my tea herself, she complimented my dress, and then in the same breath, she leaned forward and said something she had said to me once before, something I had spent years trying to unhear. "Mia, dear, you understand what this engagement is, don't you? Daniel needs stability right now. You provide that, but a mother knows her son. And my son's heart has always belonged somewhere else." Last time, those words had cracked something open in me that never fully healed. This time, I smiled. I reached for my teacup and I said, "I completely understand, Eleanor. I just want to make Daniel happy." She looked satisfied, relieved even, like a woman who had just confirmed her exit strategy was still in place. She had no idea I had just gotten her confession on tape. But here is the twist that even I wasn't ready for. When I got home that evening and played back the recording, I heard something in the background, something I had missed while sitting across from Eleanor, focused on keeping my expression neutral. A voice, muffled, coming from the next room in the restaurant's private section. I turned up the volume, pressed the phone to my ear, and I heard Daniel. He wasn't on a call. He wasn't in the restroom. He was there, in that restaurant, while his mother sat across from me and delivered her little speech. He had been there the entire time. He had sent her, he had listened, which meant this wasn't just betrayal. This was a coordinated performance, a test to see if I would break quietly. My hands were completely still as I set the phone down, because I finally understood what kind of enemy I was dealing with. And now they were about to find out what kind of enemy I was. I want you to stop for a moment and think about the worst thing someone could take from you. Not money, not status, not even love. Think about something so foundational, so deeply yours, that losing it would mean losing the entire story of who you are. That is what they took from me. And I didn't find out until a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement, when I went looking for something that was never supposed to be found. It started with a folder. Daniel had left his laptop open at my apartment. Careless, or so I thought. In my first life, I had never touched it. I was that kind of woman back then. respectful, careful with boundaries, terrified of seeming like I didn't trust him. This time, I sat down and I opened it. Most of it was what you'd expect. Work emails, financial reports, a folder labeled Kang Development Q3. But then, buried inside that folder, inside a subfolder with no name, just a string of numbers, I found a document that made the floor feel like it dropped out from under me. It was a land transfer agreement. My father's land, 40 acres of property outside the city that my father had spent his entire life building, that he had registered in my name before he passed, that I had believed was safely mine. Untouched, uncontested, waiting. The agreement was dated 8 months ago, signed by my father's former business partner. A man named Richard Wren, Sophia's father. I read it 3 times, then I read it again, because my mind kept rejecting what my eyes were seeing. The document outlined a private deal, an arrangement between Richard Wren and Eleanor Kang, to absorb my father's land into a larger development project the Kang family had been quietly assembling for years. But there was a condition. The land was still legally mine. To transfer it cleanly, without a court battle, without public scrutiny, they needed my signature. And to get my signature, they needed my trust. They needed me to become a Kang. My engagement was never about Daniel choosing me. It was never about love, compatibility, or even convenience. It was a legal strategy, a way to move 40 acres of inherited land from my name into theirs without triggering a single alarm. The wedding was the finish line. The moment I signed the marriage certificate, Eleanor's lawyers were prepared to present a prenuptial clause, buried in 40 pages of legal language, that would fold my inherited assets into the Kang family estate. I would have signed it. I know I would have, because the last time, I did. I just never lived long enough to understand what I had signed away. I closed the laptop, I stood up, I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, watching people move through their ordinary Tuesday like the world wasn't completely rearranging itself inside my chest. Sophia wasn't just Daniel's secret lover. She was the architect's daughter. She had been placed in my life, befriended me, stayed close, monitored me, because her father needed eyes on me. Needed to know when I was vulnerable, when I was isolated, when I was too in love to read the fine print. Our entire friendship had been a job. But here is where it twists even further, because I am not done. When I finally pulled myself together and went back to that document, I scrolled to the very last page. The signature lines, Richard Wren's signature was there, Eleanor's initials were there, and below them, in handwriting I recognized more than my own. Neat, careful, slanted slightly to the left, was my mother's signature. My mother, who had been dead for 2 years. Either someone had forged it, or my mother had signed this document before she died, and never told me a single word. I didn't know which answer was worse. There are 2 kinds of grief. The kind that breaks you open, loud, messy, impossible to hide. And the kind that goes completely quiet, that settles into your bones like cold water and turns everything inside you still. What I felt standing in that kitchen, staring at my dead mother's signature on a land theft document, was the second kind. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I simply made a decision. If they wanted a performance, a biddable, grateful, unsuspecting fiancé, I would give them the best performance of my life. Right up until the moment I burned everything they had built to the ground, I spent the next 2 weeks moving carefully. Quietly, I contacted a property lawyer through a college friend, someone completely outside Daniel's social world, and had the land transfer document analyzed without revealing my name. The verdict came back in 4 days. The document was partially fraudulent. My mother's signature had been traced. A forensic comparison would prove it in court within hours. But I didn't file anything. Not yet. Because I needed them to feel safe. Confident, I needed them. He had a meeting with Richard Wren at a private club downtown. I knew about it because I had started checking the shared calendar he gave me access to early in the engagement. A gesture he intended as romantic, but which had become my most valuable intelligence tool. The meeting was listed simply as RW. Property review. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. I sent someone else. My cousin Lena. Sharp, unreadable, and deeply unimpressed by wealthy men. sat 2 tables away with a glass of wine and her phone pointed at a very specific angle. She wasn't recording the conversation. She was recording the documents Daniel spread across the table. The updated transfer timeline, the revised legal structure, and most importantly, the new date they had circled in red. They had moved the wedding up by 3 weeks. Something had spooked them. They were accelerating, which meant somewhere, somehow, a thread I had pulled had been noticed. I sat with that information for one night. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the forensic document specialist. I told her to prepare a formal report. The second was to a journalist I had met once at a charity event, a woman known for financial exposés who had been quietly investigating the Kang family's development practices for over a year. I didn't give her everything. I gave her just enough to make her hungry. The third call I almost didn't make. It was to my mother's oldest friend, a woman named Grace who had known my mother since before I was born, who had sat at my mother's bedside in her final weeks. I asked her one question. Did my mother ever mention a man named Richard Wren? The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. And then Grace said, very quietly, "Mia, your mother didn't sign that document willingly. She called me the night before she passed. She was frightened. She said she had made a terrible mistake and that she needed to find a way to protect you before it was too late." My throat closed. "She tried to leave you something," Grace whispered. "A letter. I have it. I've had it for 2 years. I didn't know if I should ever." "I'm coming tonight," I said. I was already reaching for my keys, because whatever was in that letter was either going to confirm everything I suspected or completely rewrite it. My mother's letter was 4 pages long. She had written it by hand, in the careful, slanted script I had grown up watching fill grocery lists and birthday cards and the margins of her favorite books. But this was not a grocery list. This was a confession, a warning, and at the very end, a weapon she had left behind specifically for me. I read it standing in Grace's hallway, coat still on, keys still in my hand. My mother had known Richard Wren for years, not as a stranger, but as my father's most trusted business partner. When my father died, Richard had approached her within weeks, grieving, overwhelmed, drowning in paperwork she didn't understand. She had trusted him to help manage the estate. He had presented the land transfer as a temporary legal arrangement, a protection measure he called it, to shield the property from inheritance taxes while she sorted out the estate. She had signed it believing she was protecting me. By the time she realized what she had actually signed, she was already sick, already running out of time, and Richard had made it quietly clear that if she contested the document, he had the resources to tie it up in courts for years. Long enough that I would inherit nothing but legal fees. So she did the only thing she had left to do. She documented everything. Every meeting, every conversation, every manipulative word Richard Wren had ever said to her. Names, dates, amounts, promises. 4 pages of evidence written in a dying woman's handwriting, witnessed and notarized by Grace the week before she passed. My mother had not betrayed me. She had been building me a case. I stood in Grace's hallway for a long time after I finished reading. And then I folded the letter very carefully, placed it inside my coat, and I said, "Thank you for keeping this safe." Grace took my hand. She knew you'd come back for it someday. She said you were the smartest person she had ever known. I smiled. For the first time in a very long time, it was real. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday. I let them have Thursday and Friday. I let Eleanor finalize the seating chart. I let Sophia play the role of devoted best friend and bridesmaid, adjusting my veil, telling me how beautiful I looked, smiling that practice smile that had taken me years to see through. I let Daniel stand at the altar in his perfectly pressed suit, looking like a man who had already won. I let them have all of it. And then, at 10:43 a.m., 11 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin, 3 things happened simultaneously. The journalist published her piece, front page of the financial section, digital and print, Kang Development, and the fraudulent land scheme that funded their empire. My mother's letter, notarized, forensically verified, was attached as a primary source document. Richard Wren's name was in the headline. Eleanor's initials were in paragraph 4. The property lawyer filed an emergency injunction freezing all Kang-affiliated land transfers pending a full court investigation. And I walked out of the bridal suite, not in tears, not in a panic, in the same dress, same veil, same shoes, and I walked straight past the flower arrangements and the string quartet and the 200 guests already seated, right to the front doors. I heard the commotion start behind me. Eleanor's voice, sharp and suddenly afraid. Daniel calling my name. And for the first time, the smoothness was gone. He sounded exactly like what he was, desperate, caught. Sophia said nothing. I imagined she was already looking for the nearest exit. I did not turn around. Outside, the spring air was cool and clean and completely indifferent to the disaster unraveling inside that building. I stood on the steps, tilted my face toward the sun, and breathed. My phone rang. The journalist. "It's live," she said. "It's everywhere, I know," I said. I took off the ring, placed it on the stone railing, left it there for no one. And I walked away from everything they had tried to steal from me. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as the only person in that entire story who had known exactly how it would end. My mother had built me a weapon. I had